And just like that, football is back. Welcome into the SpringBlake College Football Show, your favorite ball knowers' favorite ball knowing show. And we have got an awesome episode coming up. We're going to tie a bow on week 0, everything we saw. I'm going to crown my national champion today and fill out my college football playoff bracket. And it might sound a little early, but we're also going to start previewing some week 1 matchups. We have too many awesome games from Friday up through Monday to just fit them into Wednesday and Friday shows. So we're going to do some of that here today as well too. Before we get into all of that, I have to do what every show on the earth has to do. Please support this show. If you are a first timer here, first of all, welcome. Thank you for checking this show out. It's college football. I'm SpringBlake. Now you understand the name. Make sure if you're here on YouTube to leave a like on this video, to comment, interact, let me know your thoughts, and also go and subscribe to this channel because you are going to want everything that we've got coming out this college football season. It shows support, it shows growth here, and that's what we're trying to do. So if you're listening, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, please subscribe, leave a 5-star review, share it with people. Be like, hey, this guy knows ball. We're going to talk about our week 0 bets. This guy knows ball. Make sure to support this show. I promise all the support you give me, I will give to you in tenfold worth of content. Please also show some love on my socials. That is mostly TikTok and Twitter at SpringBlakeCFB, just like the show SpringBlake College Football. All right, first off, week 0. Your boy is back and better than ever. We finished last college football season up almost 70 units. I know that sounds insane. You can go check my Action Network. Maybe I'll post it on our socials so you can just see that I'm not bullshitting you. We finished last season up 70 units. We had an awesome year. We picked the Heisman. Every week we had some fantastic wins, and we started off hot in week 0. I was nervous, okay? I was very worried. You don't just go into a week 0 knowing everything. There's so many games, so many new additions, subtractions, travel stuff. You never know what's going to happen, but your boy crushed it. 4-1 on my 5 best bets. That is Iowa State plus 3.5. They won outright. We had the under in that game of 50.5. Boy, oh boy, were we lucky on that one. Now, I gave out 50.5. When I took it Saturday, it was 52.5. So if they had scored a touchdown, I still would have been fine on that final drive. But everybody's a winner because they nailed it out at the 1-yard line. So 2 wins in that game. We also won Kansas minus 12.5 against Fresno State. We'll talk a little bit about that game and just the amazing talent that Jalon Daniels is. And then we went 1-1 in Stanford versus Hawaii. We hit the under. And we're a really bad interception from Stanford's quarterback. When the game was practically on ice from going a perfect 5-0. We had Stanford plus 2.5. They're up 3 in enemy territory with just a couple minutes left. Awful interception. Hawaii drives down, ties it, wins it, and that's our one loss for the day. So on the year so far, 4-1. We are up 3.89 units, and we'll keep track of that all season. I'll have it in my Action Network so you can always see how we're doing this season. Hopefully you're tailing along and we can make some money together. ChatGPT, that loser, does not know ball. 1-4 in week 0. They hit Iowa State with me, but then they lost. Fresno State plus 12.5 was a loser. They took the over in Fresno State, Kansas, which was also a loser. They took UNLV minus 26.5. That spread went up to 30 before kickoff, and they beat Idaho State by 7. Really interesting game for Dan Mullen to start off the season there. We're not going to brush on that game, but I'll just say a quarterback duo of Anthony Calandria and Alex Orji, 2 transfers from Virginia and Michigan. Woof, they got some issues there. And then also lost Stanford. ChatGPT and I were in agreement on that one. So, hey, you could argue ChatGPT should have been 2-3. Instead, they're 1-4. They're down 3.4 units. So that's a full swing. That's an early start. Best ball knower competition. If you haven't been tuning in, ChatGPT and myself are going head-to-head. We did some win totals, and some futures, which you can find on my social media and in previous episodes. And we're also doing 5 best bets of the week, of which I went 4-1 and ChatGPT went 1-4. So that is the betting recap of week 0. Now let's get into the bigger storylines. So Iowa State takes the first game of the Big 12 regular season, and Matt Campbell has now taken 6 of the last 8 games over the Wildcats, won another Farmaggedon, really exciting game in Dublin that picked up steam as it went along, much like both of these offenses for Kansas State and Iowa State. So For the Cyclones, I think what stood out the most to me from Iowa State was their commitment to their offensive identity as things wore on. And we spoke about that last week. Like, yeah, they had prolific wideouts, but this was a run-first team, and they stuck with that this game. Now, they were getting nothing on the ground. They finished the game with 130 rushing yards, but had just 23 in the first half, and everything was clunky out of the gate because you have all this time off from live action, you have a game in a foreign country, and then a couple seconds in, it just starts pissing rain after it probably didn't seem in the forecast it was that likely. I thought and assumed we were going to have shit weather, and I'm glad it did for my under bet, but it's one of those perfect storms to look out of sync early on. But that being said, this smart coaching staff and this, I guess, team that is true to their identity used all that to their advantage in the second half. Kansas State's defensive line was great early on. But you got to remember, it's also their first time playing live football. You can emulate and try and get live reps in practices and scrimmages, but when you're put on a field and it's the first time going into the third quarter or your first time going into the fourth quarter, practice doesn't matter. You're going to get tired. And you could see they were gassed defensively, that being Kansas State, by the middle of the third quarter. And that's when Iowa State started to really lean on them. The running back duo, Carson Hansen, Abu Sama, like I said, they got up to 130 yards, so over 100 on the ground in that second half. Really just stayed true to themselves. They didn't panic offensively. And then when it mattered, Rocco Becht made some huge plays when it was required of him. A couple of really nice design runs where they enter, they get out of the huddle and they're in a almost like a bunched up formation. They spread it out, design run, because they've spread out the defense from that point. They did that twice. One was for a touchdown. And then, man, his 2 touchdown passes were on beautiful balls as well, too. So it wasn't perfect from Rocco. He was a little shaky to start the year, which you can expect from teams in week 0 and week 1, as we'll see in preview later this week. But, I think that you can envision a world where this offense is sound as the year progresses. I think they will find their next wide receiver in this room. And there's a couple guys that will be vying for that role. But if your base is just a really strong commitment to the run game, you'll allow time as the season goes on for this passing attack to open up. So, it wasn't perfect from Rocco. It wasn't perfect. They don't have the potent wide receiver room, but I like what we saw in week 0 and think there's a lot of room to grow as they go forward in the season. Now, for Iowa State defensively, it was an issue. I think they're fortunate to have played a very clunky Wildcat offense that we'll discuss here shortly. But I will say, and we talked about this in the preview, you can see the importance that a healthy linebacker room makes, because there were a ton of big plays by that duo when the defense was in a jam. I remember at the goal line, it was like I don't know if it was a 3rd and goal run or some sort, but a linebacker blew through the gap, made a huge play. And so the linebackers were great. Defensive line, they've got Big Citrus in the middle who was all over the place. Outside of that, I still have my questions. And the secondary was frankly a mess, and the defensive line only brought down Avery Johnson, I think, once in that game. So a lot to be feeling good about Iowa State offensively. Obviously, you get a first conference game of the year, a conference win of the year before the season even starts. But I do see some points of this roster where it's like, okay, well, if they're to contend for a Big 12 title, I need to see a little bit more from the edge room, maybe a little bit more cleaned up secondary play. And then hopefully as the year goes on, they can find a little bit more of that passing game to where it's not just like crucial situations need to make a play. So that was my thoughts on Iowa State from that game. Kansas State, I know it's the first game of a new season and you have a new play caller. He's been on the coaching staff with Avery Johnson, but it's first time calling plays for this team. That being said, I didn't get the Wildcats' approach on offense. I was really confused with how little they used Avery Johnson as a runner. In my opinion, you should always play into your quarterback's best strengths. And if you're doing that, you should be operating kind of like a read option offense and then build your passing game off of that. If you are read option and everything is kind of the defensive line and front sevens reading and reacting, you can build off of that to develop deep passing shots. If you get the defense to bite in, now all of a sudden the deep passing game is open. And I think they were too like, what's the right way to say this? I think that Kansas State was too reliant on the drop back passing game and tried running just like more of a pro style offense. And that being said, when they did do the design runs for Avery, it was pretty predictable and bland. We'll talk about Kansas briefly in this, not as much as we will talk about this game. The way that Kansas uses Jalon Daniels and how creative and tricky everything is on offense, it's going to lead to more success in college football. It's kind of like taking a Ferrari out for a spin during rush hour, taking it on the highway in busy traffic time. There's no room to be reckless and have a little fun with it. Take the Ferrari out at midnight when you've got, empty roads, maybe not as people policing the area, and you can really get the best usage out of that Ferrari. As my grandpa used to say, clean out the carburetor, really just get that thing humming. So that's kind of how I looked at it with Avery. It was like, why aren't we getting on the attack with Avery and his legs? Why are we just kind of using it when it's needed? So that was what I thought. You did get a couple of deep passing touchdowns from Avery Johnson in this game, but both were on blown coverages by what is a weak Iowa State secondary. So I don't look at that as like, they can hang their hat on this. It was more of a right play, right time kind of scenario. Now it's early. It's week 0. I do want to remind myself to stay patient, but something that's definitely worth monitoring as we progress through the early parts of this season. I just want to see them use Avery Johnson in the best way possible of his talents and for the team. I just don't know if there's a world where they're stacking wins with him as a drop back passer that runs when the team needs him to run. I think there needs to be a little bit more of an unpredictability with this offense. Outside of that, I thought the team looked good. We knew the front seven was going to be great, and they were early on. It was awesome. We knew the secondary was the weakness of the team, and we saw in some of those deep passing plays by Rocco Becht in the end zone that, they weren't able to get their hands on the ball. Both of these things that we thought were true, and as the game wore on, the guys up front got tired. And you can be mad about it, but it's week 0, and it's their first time playing 60 minutes of real football, and that's just going to happen across the sport. And we can kind of take that and put it in our head for week 1 and remember, like, if a team is relying on its front seven and they're going up against another run-heavy team week 1, by the end of the game, they might be a little bit tired, and that defense might not be as strong as they were in the first half. So I don't see it as a glaring concern. I got the game I expected out of Kansas State defensively, really solid all around. And then I think as we look forward for this season, the ceiling for the Wildcats comes down to how the quarterback is used and how he performs in that usage. So, if I sat here after a week 0 game in Ireland and was like, Kansas State is no longer a contender for the Big 12 or Iowa State's going to win the Big 12, I'd just sound stupid. It was a good game. These are two teams that'll be in the mix, and they showed us reasons why they should be in the mix 3 months from now. So those are my thoughts on Farmaggedon. Really fun game to start off the college football season. Just a couple smaller notes. Other games. Kansas beats Fresno State. I believe the final score was 31-7. Jalon Daniels was amazing. And we talked about this in the preview. Like, he's one of those guys that if he's playing at his best and he's healthy, there's few guys that are harder to game plan against in this sport. Jayhawks offense was nice. Jalon finished the day 18 of 20 through the air, 223 total yards, 3 passing touchdowns. Their defense did a nice job tightening up after the opening drive where Fresno State just kind of marched down pretty quickly. And the offense is just so much fun to watch. And again, when I think of like, oh my God, if you could just give this offense to Avery Johnson, Kansas State would be so hard to predict on a week in, week out basis. But they have Jalon Daniels instead, which is also just so much fun. That being said, like, we got to protect Jalon Daniels at all costs, man. It was week 1, and he was just taking hard shot after hard shot, brutal hits. He does well enough sometimes protecting himself as a runner, but in the drop back passing game, he really sticks in there till the last second. He was hobbling around already. It's week 0. I just want this guy to make it to December without missing any games. I don't know how, easy of an ask that is, but if Kansas is going to be in the mix for the Big 12 title, it's because Jalon is the quarterback for a full season. So keeping him healthy is just so important. And yeah, that was, there's not much else to take away. Really fun game. And Jalon, I hope people watched it just because he's one of those guys that, when he's on the TV screen, you should be paying attention. I mean, there was one play specifically, I think the offensive line got, tripped up by a cornerback blitz, and Jalon saw the corner coming and was just like, whoop, just like, oh, I'm just going to outrun you to one side, spin around and outrun you to the other side. He could have taken off for a 20-yard gain, but also had a receiver opening. So he ended up with a 15-yard passing play, but he's just going to be that guy every week that you want to watch because there's 3 or 4 plays where you're just like, there's not a lot of guys in the sport that can do that. And then I just want to reiterate one more time, like, God, that Stanford game was brutal. Stanford shouldn't have lost that if not for a terrible pick thrown with the game on ice, as I said. Stanford plays a physical brand of football, man. They ran the ball so many damn times, but you go on to learn that they kind of have to because there's nothing else on that roster that, or team that they're capable of doing. This isn't going to be a great passing attack. Quarterback play is really bad. I think I saw the EPA per play on passing plays was negative 0.34, which is 0.1 worse than any team had last season. I just want to talk about it because I needed Stanford to get to 4 wins this season. That was one of my team total bets, and I needed that one, and they gave it away. So don't feel great about that. But yeah, that's my thoughts on week 0. Nothing else. I mean, Dan Mullen almost losing to an FCS team. That's not good, but, I don't know what to expect out of UNLV. I'm not a G5 guy. I've openly admitted that. So let's move along now. We are going to go, should we do playoffs first or preview first? I think we're going to save college football playoff bracket and my national champion for the end. Keep you guys listening. So as I mentioned, we have to start previewing week 1 games because there's too many great games to break down, and to just jam pack it in Wednesday and Friday, we would just be talking games, and there's other stuff that we want to do throughout the week. So let's get this one out first. We have a massive game on our hands Friday night in Waco, Texas. And by the way, Friday night football, college football, I'm so glad, for a while college football was trying to protect high school football with the Friday night lights and not really do a lot of big matchups. High school football is great. I'm sorry for those that, are conflicted about going to their son's game versus watching Baylor Auburn, but I'm going to watch Baylor Auburn because I don't have a kid and I want to watch football as many nights as possible. Massive game. Friday night, as I said, Baylor Bears, my Big 12 champions of the 2025 season, are playing host to Hugh Freeze's Auburn Tigers in what might be the biggest coaching game, or the biggest game of his coaching career. As we will in every game breakdown, we're going to start with what I know I can trust from both of these teams. And for Auburn, it starts defensively. Really solid unit from last year. They returned 6 starters from 2024. Great front line, awesome secondary. And the group overall is better than last year's numbers will show because of volatile offense just put them in a bad position time in and time out. So I can trust the defense. And while I can't trust the quarterback just yet on offense, and it might take me a while to get there, I do think everything around him is really good. One of the best offensive lines in the nation, one of the most talented wide receiver rooms in the country. And those two things right there are going to be massive in this game. Baylor doesn't have a bad secondary or a bad defensive line, but Auburn has the clear talent edge in both of those matchups, receivers versus corners, offensive line versus defensive line. They need to show out. They need to get movement in the ground game so Auburn can stay two-dimensional. And you're going to need guys like Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton to make big plays on the outside. Again, things need to be as simple for Jackson Arnold to start off this year. You have to get confidence back in him as he progresses into his second season, his first one here with Auburn. So that's what I can trust from the Tigers. Now, for Baylor, I trust that this team is going to be ready to play week 1 because they return so much production from last season. Quarterback Sawyer Robertson is back for his 4th season. He's joined by the Bears' top 2 rushers, top 2 wideouts from last season, to go along with a very experienced offensive line. This will be one of the best offensive attacks in the Big 12, but they have their work cut out for them in week 1, especially up front against a talented Tiger defense. Now, defensively for the Baylors, I think the front 7 is strong. Linebacker's great. Keaton Thomas is the returning player, and they brought in 3 really talented transfers who will be starting across that linebacker room as a whole in what's a 3-4 defensive scheme. If the defensive line can open up holes for these linebackers to make plays, I think that is where Baylor can really make things tricky for Auburn, because again, if Auburn's running the football well, Jackson Arnold doesn't need to do everything. But if you're getting through and stuffing up and all of a sudden Auburn's offense is one-dimensional, that's where you want Jackson Arnold on his toes in this game. Now, that being said, getting through Auburn's offensive line is a tall task. So that's what I think I know from both teams. Let's talk about what I think I know from both of these teams. And let's stick with Baylor, because while I think that momentum and continuity is on their side, there's a chance that was just because they had a lighter schedule to finish the Big 12 regular season last year. They finished the season 6-1, good bowl game against LSU, but in conference they played against West Virginia, Houston, Oklahoma State, some of the worst teams in the conference last year. Now, it's good to stack wins, and you're not going to apologize for beating bad teams, but we'll learn quickly into this season whether or not that was a mirage if they're slow out the gate. And by the way, they're 2 tough tests in the non-conference, Auburn this week and SMU the week after. So I think I know that they have momentum, and I think I know that this continuity should have them humming like they were at the end of the year. But how much of that was just playing against lesser competition, we'll probably find out in the next couple of weeks. For Auburn, as I said, I think Jackson Arnold should be in a much better position to succeed here than he was at Oklahoma. That being said, anyone in their right mind is terrified and worried that everything he had to endure as a true freshman with the Sooners may have messed up his swagger, his confidence, and fall camp hasn't necessarily been this glowing review either for the young quarterback. So if we're sitting here at halftime Friday night and he's 5 of 12 for 42 yards and a pick, this game could easily favor the Bears in the second half and really make for some uncomfortable conversations about what needs to be done with Auburn's quarterback position moving forward. However, it could be the total opposite way. You know, Arnold could be 10 for 12, 110 passing yards, 2 scores, and all of a sudden you're sitting there like, oh shit, Auburn's found their guy, he's found his right home, they'll be a force to be reckoned with in the SEC. Any of that can happen, but at the very least, I know that he's in a better position to succeed here with the weapons outside and the offensive line in front of him. So, moving along in this one, I've got a fun betting nugget. I've got a fun betting nugget for this game. So, every new season has their trends, and we'll start to pick up on things to take advantage of later in the season. But heading into this game, the Bears are 5-12 at home and 7-9-1 against the spread against FBS opponents the last 3 seasons under Dave Aranda. So, again, that's 5-12 outright, 7-9-1 against the spread at home against FBS opponents the last 3 seasons. This line has snip-snapped more than Michael Scott's vasectomy procedures. As of taping this, right now, I was just looking at the line. Auburn is now back as a road favorite, -2.5. Like I said, it keeps going back and forth. A couple weeks ago, it was Baylor favored after originally being Auburn. Auburn -2.5, and it's crazy to say this before they've played a snap of actual football. This is a desperation game for Hugh Freeze and his Tigers. If they do not win this one against Baylor, they could be staring down the barrel of a 2-5 start to the season. And you say, why do you say that? Well, they've got 2 tune-ups after Baylor, and then SEC play starts with Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Georgia, and Mizzou. Those 4 teams are probably at the same, if not potentially better talent level than the Tigers. So if they lose those 4, and let's even just give them one of them. Let's say they're 3-4, or that would mean they're either 2-5 or 3-4. Excuse me. This is an important one to win because it's about momentum here this year for Auburn. You can't just stack a few wins at the end of the year and be like, hey, we feel good heading into 2026. No, you need to win them early because you're not fully out of time, but people in Auburn are starting to raise their eyebrows. So while Baylor doesn't look at this game lightly, I'm not saying that it isn't a desperation game for them. I just think there's not nearly as much riding on it for the Bears. And even if they lose a close one here to Auburn, they'll still be sitting pretty in how they view themselves in the Big 12 landscape. At the end of the day, I think Auburn's trench play is going to be the difference maker here. I think the offensive line will do a great job opening up for the run game, and in doing so, keep Jackson Arnold upright, keep him calm, keep him relaxed, and I'm just going to put a little bit of faith that the pieces around him offensively, that being Jackson Arnold, can lift him up even if he's a little shaky. I don't think this is going to be one of those 35-31 final scores. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a low-scoring game. I'm going to take the under here. I'm also going to take the Tigers to win by a score of 26-17. So I'm going to take them in the end by a decent margin. I've yet to make a final decision if game is going to be on one of my best bets. We'll save that for Wednesday or Friday show just to give you guys some time on it. But I am going to take the Tigers to get the win here. I just think they're a little bit more desperate heading into it. And, Baylor, they can afford to lose this one and still feel really good about themselves if it's a narrow defeat at home. So that's my preview on Baylor, Auburn. We're going to get into Texas OSU, LSU Clemson, Bama Florida State on Wednesday. We're going to do Notre Dame Miami on Friday, and then also talk some of my favorite bets then. So this is just the first of previewing what is set to be an awesome week one. And how are we doing on time? So sitting pretty. We still have my playoff bracket and national champion. I don't have my water next to me, so we're going to do one of our patented segues. Here's Mr. Key and Peele.
Blake.
What?
All right, so we're going to gloss over the fact that we have a little bit of a costume change. I don't know if it looks darker in here. It's now nighttime that we're finishing off this show. Had a little work snafu. Had to take a break halfway through. Wind blew, hair a mess. Anyway, we're back. We've got one final thing to do before we can wrap a bow on the 2025 preseason/fall camp era, and that is me to hand out my national champion for the 2025 season while also filling out my college football playoff bracket. So before we get started, just as a reminder, these are the seedings we had. The 4 teams receiving byes into the second round. Alabama, my number 1 overall seed. Penn State at number 2. Clemson at number 3. And Georgia rounding it out at number 4. All byes, all into round 2. And that leaves us the matchups of my 5-seeded Notre Dame Fighting Irish taking on my number 12 seed James Madison Dukes. Go Dukes. My 6th seed Texas taking on 11th seed Oklahoma. 7th seed Oregon facing 10th seed Texas A&M. And my 8-9 matchup being the Ohio State Buckeyes against the Baylor Bears. Now, some of these matchups deserve a little bit more time and attention than others, so let's get the easy ones out first. As much as I'd love to be a, crazy lunatic homer, I'm not going to take JMU to move past the first round. I'm obviously going to take Notre Dame to waltz past them into the quarterfinals, and not to the same degree, but I feel similarly to Ohio State and Baylor. So we're going to take the Buckeyes to move on as well. Now, the other two, a little bit more tricky. Texas A&M versus Oregon. Oregon has some unbelievable talent, and at this point in the season, they might look completely different than how they look in weeks 1, 2, and 3 of the regular season. This is a team, if you remember last year, they almost lost to Idaho in week 2, struggled with Boise. They kind of found their footing and turned into, what was, eventually your Big Ten champions. That could happen here as well, too, for Oregon in 2025. And also at this point of the season, this late on, you might also be getting Evan Stewart back, the very talented wide receiver, injured this past offseason, probably out the entire regular season, but the hope is that maybe by the playoffs, he could be back and it would form a really awesome wide receiver room at the right time, too, when you need it. So I love a lot of that for Oregon, but when I look at them roster-wise, it just feels like they're almost loading for 2026. I think, really good team right now that finds their groove to finish out the year, and then they're back next season as one of the favorites to win the title. Meanwhile, I think Texas A&M is truly a sleeping giant in college football right now. I love their trench play, run game. I think their quarterback and wide receiver room are going to take marginal steps, and I love Mike Elko. I trust him as one of the best head coaches in this sport. So I think they'll head up to Oregon. I think they'll really just dominate the trenches, win a ground and pound game behind the running back duo of Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens. And I'm going to pick the upset here. I'm going to take Texas A&M to move into the second round. I believe it'll be the first road win. I guess it's small sample size, but through this point, it'd be my 6th game of round 1 in the college football playoffs, 4 last year, 2 this year. I'm going to take the first road team to win and a stunner up in Autzen as the Aggies move past the Ducks into the second round. And then we save the best one of this round for last. We get a rematch of the Red River Shootout to end out round 1. Now, if Oklahoma is here in the college football playoffs, it's because their offense has taken a monumental step in 2025, something that I think they're very much capable of doing, which is obviously why I have them here. And it also means that John Mateer is likely a finalist for the 2025 Heisman Trophy Award. And if Texas is here, everything we know about Texas lived up to expectations. One of the best most talented rosters in the sport. Arch Manning did a really good job at quarterback, and Steve Sarkisian continues this program on as one of the more successful year-in, year-out schools. I'm going to get cute here. I'm going to get a little cute. Let's say in the regular season, Texas takes game 1 against Oklahoma. Oklahoma learns from their lumps, gets humming on offense, figures out how to beat Texas this second time around. Reason being, and if I had to give you one idea why I think Oklahoma might have a little bit of an edge over Texas eventually. If there is one concern on the Longhorns roster, it is the offensive line. And if there is one group, one position where Oklahoma might be elite this year, it's the defensive line. So I'm going to predict a game where the defensive line is on fire. They have pressure on Arch all day. He can't get his throws off on time. They've snuffed out the design runs. And then on the other side, their offense will hum along as it has all season that I've been predicting. So give me the second straight upset here. Oklahoma moves on as one of the final 8 teams in the nation and sets up for what's going to be a really exciting quarterfinals? Yeah, quarterfinal round. So let's not waste any time. Let's move right into it. Listen to these matchups. Just soak it in for a second. Number 1 seeded Alabama taking on number 8 seeded Ohio State. Whoa. Penn State versus Texas A&M. You might be like, that's not too great. I'll talk you into it in a few minutes. Clemson versus Oklahoma. Storylines. Think about it. If you can't remember, I'll mention it to you in a second. And then we get a rematch from last year's playoffs as well, too. My 4-5 matchup of Georgia and Notre Dame. So what? You get 2 of the most storied programs in the nation, Bama, Ohio State, 2 of the most successful runs over the last 20 years, modern college football. Also have Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Williams, the 2 best offensive players in the sport, probably. Then you get a Brent Venables and Dabo Swinney reunion facing off after winning 2 national titles together at Clemson. An absolute bloodbath in the trenches between Penn State and Texas A&M, and then, as I mentioned, that rematch between Georgia and Notre Dame. So many places we can start. Let's go to Bama, Ohio State first, because as much as I think the Buckeyes are a really talented team, and much like I just said with Oregon, weeks 1, 2, and 3, they'll look totally different by the end of the regular season once they've got their feet wet. The offense is going a little bit more with the new quarterback and new pieces around him. Defensively, same thing. It's going to take a couple weeks to really get going, but once it gets going, it should be really good. However, I lost my footing here. What was I just going to say? I think, okay, I got really confused because I saw Texas on here. I was like, I wasn't talking about Texas. The Buckeyes will look like a totally different team later on this season than they did against Texas this upcoming week. All that said, I think Bama is just a special team this year. I think they have an edge along the offensive and defensive lines in this game specifically against the Buckeyes. So give me Bama into the semifinals and what will still be a pretty nice title defense run for Ohio State considering everything that they lost, coordinator changes, quarterback, defense, running back, all things considered, making it to the quarterfinals in the playoffs is a great title defense season. And now for Penn State and Texas A&M, it's a little bit of a different story. I think and trust both of these teams in the trenches a ton, and if both of them wanted to sign up for a 6-3 final score, they'd love to just smash mouth football for 60 straight minutes. However, I do think Penn State's ability to stretch the field with Drew Aller and the other receivers they've brought in this past offseason is something that the Texas A&M offense might not be able to keep up with. I think Penn State can win in a rock fight, but they can also win in a shootout. Texas A&M on the biggest stage, can they get that done against what I think is a really good and talented Penn State secondary? So give me the Nittany Lions to move on. Still an awesome second season for A&M, kind of back into that, we're one of the consistent programs in the nation that should be competing for not just conference titles, but national championships as well. On to our game number 3, Notre Dame, Georgia. Really fun matchup. Both teams enter this regular season with some unknowns, maybe question marks at the quarterback position. If they've made it this far, it's probably panned out well enough. I think both teams are going to try and be a run-first offense, but they've also made the wide receiver additions. Malachi Fields at Notre Dame, Zachariah Branch, and then the Texas A&M wide receiver, whose name I can't remember, at Georgia. They've made the additions to the passing attack, and it should be better than it was last season, but they're still going to run the ball a lot, win in the trenches, and I think that's going to make for a really fun game. However, I think for now, Georgia might be another one of those teams where they've got a lot of young dudes defensively, the offensive line, and this might just be like a gearing up for 2026 type team. And I think right now Notre Dame's roster is more talented than the one that's in Athens. So give me the Notre Dame Fighting Irish to move on in this round. If you had to say, like, okay, what's the difference maker in this game? I think Notre Dame's secondary, which is one of the best in the country, probably straps up well against Gunnar Stockton and those receivers, and that makes the difference there. So taking Notre Dame onto the semifinals. And then last but not least, we've got Clemson, Oklahoma, Venables, Sweeney. Super talented rosters. Now, Oklahoma's defensive line feasted on Arch in Texas, like I mentioned in the previous round, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be the same story here. Clemson's offensive line, experienced, talented, one of the best in the nation. And if Cade Klubnik's got time, he has plenty of wideouts to get the ball out to make things happen through the air. And as highly as I might think of Oklahoma's offense, I think there will just come a point where they run out of a little gas. I'm going to pick that to be here against the Clemson Tigers. Magical season in Norman. It ends in the quarterfinals. Clemson, Dabo gets the win over his former defensive coordinator, and they make the push into being one of the Final Four teams in the country. And that brings us to, again, another round of awesome matchups. You've got a 5-seeded Notre Dame against 1-seeded Alabama, and then my 3-2 matchup of Clemson versus Penn State. So, really fun games. Which one should we talk about first? I'm going to flip a coin in my head. Bama, Notre Dame. Okay, so iconic run of games here in the playoffs. Bama, OSU, Georgia, Notre Dame, Alabama, Crimson Tide, Fighting Irish, two of the most iconic brands in the sport, facing off with a trip to the national championship on the line. I have spent all preseason gushing about these two rosters, these two coaching staffs, probably just as much as it's no surprise. Penn State, Alabama, Notre Dame. Those are my 3 teams that I'm really in on this year more than others. Of course, I've gushed about them. The 2 most loaded defenses in the nation, in my opinion, terrific offensive lines, and then more than enough skill players to get it done. I think, Alabama has the advantage in the wide receiver room, and then at Notre Dame, the running back room is probably a little bit better than what Bama has. Obviously, Jam Miller will be back by this time as well, too, so not to say that Bama can't run the ball, but that's where I'd split hairs there. That being said, this one, when I thought of this game, it wasn't close for me. I'm going to take Bama. I think this is one of those teams, like I said with Penn State, can win in a rock fight, can win in a shootout. I think what they'll do in this game, if we're just predicting 4 months out of something that probably might never even happen, I think Bama would push the pace a little bit. And it's one of those games where you sit back and you're like, that's why we brought Ryan Grubb in. He just, on a game-to-game basis, changes how this team operates. Maybe it was a rock fight against Ohio State. Maybe it's a shootout against Notre Dame. I don't think Notre Dame, at the end of the day, has as much talent on the perimeter and at quarterback to keep pace with an offensive, juggernaut that Alabama may be by this point. So, Kalen DeBoer, Alabama, punching their ticket to a national championship. And then on the other side, It's no surprise. Everybody spends this entire offseason being like, yeah, Penn State could win it all. They got one of the best rosters in the sport. Oh, Clemson could win it all. They got one of the best rosters in the sport. They square off here. Two of the best quarterbacks, two programs like that could just prove the most with a national championship this year. Clemson and Dabo, it'd obviously be like, we did it our way, and we won a decade later when you told us it was over. Penn State getting over that hump. We can win the big one. So much on the line here in this game. Love both teams. When you're talking about these games, you're like, okay, well, what is going to be like that one small difference? For Clemson, if I had to pick holes, and that's what I'm doing here, I'm just a little bit worried about the depth defensively and also on the offensive line. I don't think they run as loaded in their backups, and that is something that doesn't really come up much in the regular season, but when you're in unprecedented, uncharted waters here in what's your 15th game potentially, I worry about having enough gas. Penn State just came from a run where they did make it to the semifinals last year. They know what it takes to get there. This is Clemson's first shot at it. And also on top of that, I think it could be one of those games where they struggle to stop the run, much like they did last year. And that might be one of those things where you're just tired, don't have the depth, and that's terrible timing to face Nick Singleton and Katron Allen behind an elite offensive line. So as much as I love both teams, I'm going to take Penn State here to win, advance, and go play for a enormous national championship. So let's just take a second. Last week, my three futures that I gave you to win it all, Bama, Penn State, Notre Dame. You shouldn't be surprised that three of them were in my Final Four, and two of them are my national championship game here. So Alabama, Penn State, for all the marbles. Two of my favorite offensive coordinators in the sport, Andy Kotelnicki, Ryan Grubb. Where would Bama have the edge here? I would say the wide receiver room. I would go depth defensively, and I might go secondary overall as well. Actually, maybe it's one of those things where they're better just about every level of the defense. Maybe I'd give Penn State linebacker. And then Penn State, what it comes down to me, is offensive line, the running back room, and the quarterback. I don't want to pick it. It's such a shame for Penn State to get all the way here, to get over that hump, to get to a national championship, and then to lose to Alabama. But that is what I'm going to pick. I think it's the Crimson Tide's year. I think that this is just, both teams are on such a mission right now. Penn State is trying to get over that hump. And for the first time ever in his coaching career, Kalen DeBoer is being doubted. He has this almost unblemished resume from, all of his coaching steps along the way, most recently Washington. He shows up to Alabama. They had a good season, but despite having a good season, everybody's like, is he the right guy for Alabama? I think this man's on a mission. I think this team is talented enough to go hand in hand with that mission, and those are the reasons I'm going to take Alabama to win a national championship in 2025. My pick in what would be awesome for the program. People in the sport might hate it that there's another great Alabama run potentially on the horizon. And then on the flip side, I mean, just how brutal, obviously the mold in the Big Ten of Michigan. Oh, we all came back for this one season. Ohio State the following year. We all came back for this one title run. They got the job done. Penn State does it in 2025, and they fall just one game short. It's going to be heartbreaking, but that's how I see the college football playoffs breaking out, and I hope that we get a lot of exciting games out of that. I think that some of the matchups and storylines, like you could put together 12 random teams and have a lot of fun stuff, but I really like how things came together for myself here. So Alabama, my national champions, and that's going to wrap up today's show. Thank you guys for listening. Watching on YouTube. Again, like, subscribe, follow my social media at SpringBlake CFB. We've got a busy week coming up, and we're going to have a busy week from now until the start of 2026. I mean, we're just going to be going. There's going to be videos on social media. There's going to be 3 episodes a week. There's going to be betting. There's going to be game previews. There's going to be breakdowns. We are in for an awesome 2025. Strap in, lock in, come along this ride with me. We're going to have a really good time. And hopefully we'll make some money doing it as well, too, if you follow those picks. So We'll be back Wednesday. 3 big game previews. I'm going to also give you my hottest takes for the college 2025 season. Finish up previews and best bets on Friday. And then we're back. And then we're just in the full swing of things. Thank you guys so much for your support. I appreciate you. I love you. I'll talk to you in a couple days. Peace.